I remember the night clearly. It was our 50th wedding anniversary. I had reserved a table at the little Italian place where we first went out all those decades ago. I wore the same kind of jacket I had back then, now a bit tighter across the stomach. I even brought the same kind of roses I gave her the first time she said she loved me. But she never showed up. At first, I thought maybe she forgot, or there had been a mix-up with the reservation. I called her, no answer. I texted, nothing. After waiting 2 hours, I went home. Her car wasn't in the driveway. That was odd. She didn't mention going anywhere. I walked inside to an eerie silence. Everything was in its place, too perfect, like she hadn't touched anything all day. Then I saw the envelope on the kitchen table. No name, just a blank white envelope, sealed. Inside it was a photo. She was in it, younger, maybe 30 years old, wearing a red coat I didn't recognize. Her hair was shorter, styled differently. She stood beside a man I'd never seen before. Tall, clean-shaven, military posture. They were at an auto. But what chilled me to the bone was that she was holding a baby. A baby that wasn't ours. I dropped into the kitchen chair, the photograph trembling in my hands. I didn't sleep that night. She came home after midnight. No explanation. No apologies. She just looked at me, sighed, and went upstairs. That's when I knew something was deeply, horribly wrong. The next day, I waited until she left for her usual book club. I'd never questioned it before, a group of retired ladies, sipping wine and gossiping. But that day, I didn't believe a word of it. I started going through her things, feeling like some desperate fool. But what I found, I wasn't ready for. In the back of her closet, tucked behind old boxes of winter coats, I found a small steel lockbox. I'd never seen it before. And I damn well knew everything in that house. It wasn't locked. Inside were 3 items. 1, a second passport. Different name. Same face. 2, a small black cell phone. Burner style. No fingerprint access, no passwords. Just texts. Dozens of them. And 3, a folded document. A clearance certificate from a company I'd never heard of. Clearance Level 6, Ops Access Approved. It was signed with initials only, AK. My hands were shaking. I opened the phone. The messages were short, coded, filled with numbers and locations. One said, a package moved to 4429 F, M doesn't suspect. Another, if he starts asking questions, activate protocol. And one that stopped my breath cold, a husband remains compliant. Safe to continue. Husband. That was me. My own wife had been referring to me like I was a target. I put everything back exactly as I found it. I knew I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I had to understand what was happening. Who she really was. Why after 50 years, I was finding out that the woman I trusted more than anyone had been living a second life. The next night, I followed her. She left like always, book club. But she didn't go to any house with wine and novels. She drove across town, parked behind a federal-looking office building, and entered through a back door. She used a badge. I saw it shine under the parking lot lights. My heart sank. I sat in the car for 2 hours, frozen. When she came back out, she wasn't alone. The man from the photo. Older now, but definitely him. They got in separate cars and left in different directions. And that's when I knew, my life, my marriage, everything I believed, was a lie. For 2 days after following her, I didn't speak. I barely ate. I couldn't sleep. I sat in my garage with the lights off, staring at the wall, thinking about every moment from the last 50 years that now felt like a scene in someone else's movie. Every smile, every touch, every whispered "I love you," all of it twisted in my mind like some cruel illusion. I wasn't even angry yet. I was still in shock. But shock fades. And when it did, something else filled the space. Cold, calculated determination. I wasn't a fool. I had worked with classified systems for 30 years. I knew how people covered their tracks. I knew what kind of protocols were used to move information and how to dig beneath them. If she had lived a second life under my nose, then I was going to unearth it, piece by piece. Quietly. Without emotion. Like I used to dismantle encryption back in the day, methodically, patiently, completely. That night, I returned to the lockbox. This time, I didn't just glance at the messages. I documented every one of them. Took photos of the screen. Dates, codes, location tags. I copied the serial number of the phone and checked it against a few old tools I had stashed in my office. The device had been active for 8 years. 8 years she had a whole separate communication line, while I sat across from her at dinner talking about grandkids and blood pressure medication. The passport? Issued under the name Claire Hensley. Born in Canada. Different birthday. I checked public records. The name didn't officially exist. No social security number. No voting record. Nothing. It was a ghost identity. One that only someone with serious clearance could obtain. But it was the clearance certificate that truly made my blood freeze. The document was from a company called Echelon Operations, a name that didn't exist on any public registry. The logo was a stylized triangle with a black line through it. I ran it through image searches, old archived government contractor lists, even dark web mirrors. One hit. Echelon Operations had been mentioned in a congressional hearing from 1986. The documents were heavily redacted, but the context was clear: a black budget surveillance programs, unacknowledged personnel, and psychological asset conditioning. My wife had been connected to that. It wasn't some affair. It wasn't boredom. It was mission-oriented. And I was part of it, unknowingly. I needed more information, and I knew exactly where to get it. Her laptop. She guarded it well, always carried it with her. But that day, she left in a hurry. Maybe she sensed something. Maybe she had a meeting. Either way, she forgot to lock the screen. I opened the lid. It was already on. Her email wasn't under her name. The domain was private, encrypted, hosted through a series of offshore relays. But I had dealt with encryption before. I wasn't fast, but I was thorough. She had folders labeled by month, going back years. Each with logs, reports, notes. Most of it was in shorthand. Some in code. But I understood enough. Each entry started with a date, a code, and the same subject line: Operation Marion. That was me. I was Operation Marion. She had been reporting on my behavior for decades. My habits. My friends. My moods. My medical history. My finances. My connections. It was all there. Every last detail. She had recorded my conversations, logged my purchases, even analyzed my emotional shifts. It was as if she were building a psychological profile, like I was a case study. Or a target. I closed the laptop and sat there for a full hour. Nothing moved in the house except the clock ticking above the refrigerator. The woman I had kissed every morning. The woman I had held through funerals and births. She wasn't a wife. She was a handler. And I was the asset. That night, I didn't say a word when she came home. She asked what I'd been doing all day. I said I cleaned the garage. She smiled and kissed me on the forehead. Like nothing had changed. But everything had. The next morning, I went to visit someone I hadn't spoken to in over 15 years. His name was Vincent. We used to work together. He ran Signals Intercept out of Langley before he retired and disappeared into Florida fishing boats and whiskey. But I knew he still had his ears open. Vincent didn't look surprised when I told him the name of the company. In fact, he turned pale. "Echelon still exists?" he said, almost whispering. "Jesus, Jack. I thought they were dismantled. What the hell is she doing with them?" "I was hoping you could help me figure that out," I said quietly. He stared at me for a long time, then nodded once. "I can. But you better be ready to lose everything." I already had. Vincent's idea of helping didn't involve a computer screen or databases. He opened an old steel cabinet in the corner of his garage, the kind that looked like it hadn't been touched since the Cold War. Inside were several manila folders, each marked with codes instead of names. He flipped through them and pulled one out, handed it to me like it was a loaded weapon. "This is the original briefing on Echelon's domestic program. From '87. I kept a copy. For insurance." The file was thin, but what was in it changed everything I thought I knew. The program had begun as a surveillance experiment during the Reagan era, tracking civilian psychological responses to information warfare. But sometime in the late 90s, it shifted. They started embedding operatives into civilian lives, testing long-term influence operations, even romantic infiltration. "They used spouses?" I asked, my throat dry. Vincent gave me a look. "Not just spouses. They used entire families, Jack. Sometimes the kids weren't even real. Just assets placed in position. Everything was monitored: behavior, loyalty, reactions under pressure." "And you?" "You were exactly the kind of profile they wanted." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My head was spinning. Vincent handed me a USB stick. I pulled some internal chatter off the net. Back-channel leaks. "There's a guy in Nevada still watching Echelon movements. You want to go deeper, talk to him. But I'm warning you, Jack, you dig into this, there's no going back." I thanked him and left. The drive home felt longer than usual. The air inside the car was thick, like it knew the truth now too. That night, I sat across from her at dinner like always. Chicken. Mashed potatoes. A glass of wine. She talked about the neighbor's dog getting out again. I nodded. Smiled. Pretended to be tired. But inside, I was building a wall. She had been in my life longer than anyone else. My parents were gone. Friends had come and gone. Even some of my own memories had faded. But she'd always been there. My constant. My comfort. And now, I had to look at her as a trained manipulator. A professional infiltrator. A woman who had documented my life like a science project. And worse, I'd loved her for it. The next day, I used the USB from Vincent. The files were encrypted, but I had the tools to work around that. Took me most of the night. What I found was a series of communications between Echelon agents. They used code names, but I recognized the style of writing. One sender in particular, codename Avesta, had written dozens of reports detailing emotional manipulation strategies, behavioral logs, and something called threshold monitoring. In one of the reports, she described a subject known only as Asset M. Me. She wrote, "A subject displays increased cognitive resilience. Potential resistance to full emotional override. Recommend sustained domestic routine to suppress suspicion." Another, Asset M continues to operate under illusion of traditional marital dynamic. Long-term compliance stable. Termination not recommended. Termination. That word echoed in my skull. They had considered ending me. Ending me. Like I was a contract. A tool. I printed nothing. Saved nothing. I knew better. Digital traces linger. I read, memoized, and wiped. Every keystroke. Every access point. Then I took a walk through the neighborhood like it was just another Tuesday. But inside, I was done pretending. I started preparing. I knew how to dismantle systems. She was a psychological operator. I was an engineer. She played with feelings. I played with structures. This was going to be my design now. Over the next week, I did 3 things. First, I moved our finances. Quietly. Legally. I created a trust, with my name only, locked behind clauses she wouldn't see coming. Second, I transferred ownership of our home into a shell entity I had quietly set up back in 2003 for tax reasons. She'd forgotten it even existed. Now, she didn't own the house. Not a square inch. And third, I created a false narrative. I left hints. Little pieces of paper she'd find. Names she didn't recognize. Fake receipts. I staged a phone call where I whispered about a woman named Elena and how she was close. I made sure she heard it. Within 2 days, she started watching me. She checked my phone when I left it unattended. She followed me in her car one morning, thinking I didn't notice. She asked indirect questions about my day. Her eyes didn't show fear. Not yet. But they were calculating. Evaluating. Good. She was starting to lose control. Just the way I wanted. Because the game wasn't over. Not even close. She wasn't careless. Not in the slightest. For 50 years, she'd maintained an image so perfect it made our neighbors jealous. She was charming, warm, always remembered birthdays and brought casserole to funerals. But I knew what I was looking for now, and once you know where to dig, the cracks start to show. I found her second storage unit by accident. Well, almost by accident. She had always kept a little planner, the kind with worn leather and a strap around it. She never let anyone touch it. That day, she left it on the coffee table while she stepped into the shower. I didn't open it. Didn't need to. I snapped a photo of the page for Thursday, one word, Huntley. I knew every inch of our town, but Huntley wasn't a friend, or a store, or a doctor. I ran it through public listings. Only one hit. Huntley Storage, 3 towns over. The next day, I made a trip out under the guise of visiting my cousin's grave. I pulled up to the storage complex, walked around like I was lost. The place was mostly empty, quiet, surrounded by chain link and dust. But one of the units had fresh tire tracks in front of it. Unit 217. I stood there for a long time, watching it, memoizing every detail. I didn't break in. Not yet. I needed to know what I was walking into. That night, I called Vincent again. I need a favor, I said. He chuckled. I figured. You're still breathing, so I guess she hasn't figured you out yet. I need to know who owns Unit 217 at Huntley Storage. He paused. I'll see what I can find. An hour later, he called back. It's under a shell corporation. But guess what address that corporation is registered to? I didn't answer. I already knew. My house. That was all the confirmation I needed. 3 days later, she told me she had a women's retreat for the weekend. Yoga, wine, that sort of thing. I smiled, nodded, helped her pack. Kissed her goodbye like any good husband would. As soon as she left, I went to Unit 217 with a set of tools and a pair of gloves. It wasn't locked with a simple padlock, it had a biometric scanner. Fancy. But it had a backup mechanical override, and I'd dealt with far more complex systems back in the day. Took me 20 minutes, but eventually, the door creaked open. What I saw inside nearly dropped me to my knees. The space was organized like a small operations center. Metal shelves lined with files, photos, communication logs. There was a wall-mounted board with red strings and labels. My name was in the center, circled in black ink. Photos of me from decades ago. One from our wedding. One from my old office. Even one from a fishing trip I took alone in 1994. Who had taken that? And then, surveillance photos from recent weeks. Me at the grocery store. Me getting gas. Me talking to the mailman. She had never stopped monitoring me. Not even now. There was a file labeled Final Phase. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a printout of our latest will. The version I hadn't signed yet. The version where everything went to her if I passed unexpectedly. Next to it, a document labeled Palliative Care Strategy. It outlined a plan to gradually administer medication that would reduce my cognitive function, make me more compliant, easier to manipulate. I couldn't breathe. She had planned to erase me without even pulling a trigger. I spent the next 6 hours inside that unit. I scanned every document, took photos of every board, copied files onto a clean flash drive. I left everything exactly as I found it. Then I closed the door, locked it again, and drove home in silence. I sat in the dark that night, staring at her side of the bed. The pillow where she laid her head. The books she read. The perfume she wore. I didn't sleep. When she returned the next evening, she smiled, kissed me, and asked how my weekend was. It was quiet, I said. Peaceful. She poured us each a glass of wine. I didn't touch mine. She noticed. Her eyes flicked to my glass, then back to me. Something wrong? I smiled. Just tired. Long day. She nodded, slowly. Then she picked up her own glass and took a sip. I watched her carefully. She was watching me too. The game had shifted. Now we were both playing. But only one of us knew how it would end. By the end of that week, I no longer looked at her as a wife. She became a subject. A variable in a problem I needed to solve. For 50 years, I'd called her my love, my partner, my life. But now I referred to her in my notes as the operator. I stopped reacting emotionally. That's what she counted on, emotional fog. Confusion. Guilt. I shut all of it off like a switch. I watched her routine with surgical precision. Monday, a grocery store, lunch with Nancy, who, as far as I could tell, didn't exist. Tuesday, a phone call from the garden, long and hushed. Wednesday, a nothing, which was always more suspicious than something. She played the role perfectly. Warm. Caring. Familiar. But her eyes were always calculating. I needed her to believe that she was still in control. That I hadn't seen behind the curtain. And to do that, I had to become predictable again. Dull. Passive. So I played the part. I cooked. I cleaned the gutters. I watched the news in the evening and fell asleep on the couch. I let her check my phone. I even left fake messages to a non-existent friend named Martin, complaining about my blood pressure and my lawn. She read them. I saw her smirk when she thought I wasn't looking. Good. Keep thinking I'm harmless. Meanwhile, I prepared. The first step was legal. I scheduled a private consultation with a law firm 3 counties over. specialists in asset protection, elder abuse, and whistleblower protection. I brought them copies of the files I'd found in the storage unit, redacted, carefully curated. Just enough to show that I had been unknowingly documented for decades by someone operating under a false identity, someone connected to an unregistered entity known for psychological manipulation. The senior partner reviewed the files in silence for a long time. Then he looked up at me and said, "You understand this goes beyond divorce?" "I do. We're talking criminal conspiracy, surveillance violations, potential national security implications. If we do this, it'll be like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline." I nodded. "That's the plan." He leaned back. "We'll need everything you've got. You'll have it." Next, I reached out to someone I'd kept in my back pocket for years. A man named Riley. Former defense contractor turned cybersecurity consultant. The type of guy who could make entire networks disappear or reappear at will. I hadn't spoken to him since 2009. But when I sent him a secure message through a channel we'd used back in the day, he responded within 10 minutes. "Still breathing," he wrote. "Barely," I replied. "Need a clean break. Full scrub. And one trace drop. Timeline? 3 weeks. Done." The trace drop was key. I wanted her to find something. Something I left behind, accidentally. A trail that looked like I was running scared. That I'd found too much. That I was panicking. I planted documents on an old laptop, encrypted, messy, obvious. Then I left it open in the garage, forgotten, after working on taxes. Within a day, she found it. I saw the browser history, she'd opened every file. And later that night, I noticed her texting under the dinner table. She thought she was ahead of me again. Perfect. The trap was set. I waited 1 more week. Every detail mattered. I had timed the power grid data in our neighborhood. I had mapped out response times for local emergency services. I even knew which neighbor would be out of town that weekend, the one with the security camera pointed toward our driveway. Friday night, I told her I needed to get away for the weekend. "Just some time to think," I said. "I'm not feeling like myself." She looked concerned. Touched my hand. "You've seemed distant." I nodded. "I'm just tired." She kissed my cheek. "You go. Rest. I'll be here when you get back." "I bet you will," I thought. I left early Saturday morning. But I didn't go far. Just to a cabin I'd rented under a fake name 2 towns over. It had no internet. No cell coverage. Just a wood stove and a deep silence. From there, I activated the drop. The files I had given the law firm were released, selectively, to 4 locations, one journalist, 1 oversight committee, 1 encrypted leak site, and 1 private contact within the Department of Defense. I made sure the timestamps aligned. The narrative was simple: a retired systems engineer had discovered that his wife of 50 years was an embedded psychological operative, and he had the documents to prove it. Then I waited. On Sunday afternoon, my phone, the secure one, lit up. "Vincent. They are crawling. I just saw 2 black SUVs at your place. No sirens. No noise. Just watching. Her? Still inside. But they are not there for her." I nodded. "They will be." He paused. "You sure about this, Jack?" I looked out the window at the trees. She planned to erase me. This is me returning the favor. I hung up. By nightfall, the news had started whispering. Unconfirmed reports of a domestic surveillance leak. A government spokesperson said it was a fabricated incident. But I knew better. The game was over. And I was no longer the asset. She called me 3 times that Monday morning. I didn't answer. By the 4th, she left a voicemail. Her voice was calm, but there was a sharpness beneath it, the tone she used when she didn't know if she was in control anymore. "Jack, I think we need to talk. There's some confusion happening. I'm worried. Call me back, please." Worried. That was new. I listened to the message twice, memorizing every pause, every inflection. Then I deleted it. I didn't return until Wednesday evening. I pulled into the driveway just before sunset. The lights in the house were all on. Curtains drawn. She was waiting. I could feel it in the air, tight, brittle. She met me at the door, smiling too much. "There you are," she said. "I was starting to think you weren't coming back." I nodded, stepped inside, set my bag down. Needed time. You know how I get. She tilted her head, searching my face. "You look tired. Didn't sleep much." She offered me dinner, lasagna, salad, a glass of wine. I declined the wine. She didn't press. We sat down at the table, and for a while, it was quiet. Normal, almost. But normal was dead. Halfway through the meal, she said, "I've been thinking about us." I set down my fork. She continued, "We've been through so much. Life has its moments. But I still believe in us, Jack. I always have." I looked at her for a long time. "Is that why you kept a file on me for 30 years? She didn't flinch. That scared me more than anything. "What are you talking about?" she said softly. "Storage unit. Huntley. Unit 217. Silence. She didn't blink. Didn't deny it. She just stared at me. "I don't know what you think you saw." "I saw everything." She leaned back in her chair. The mask cracked for half a second, just enough to reveal something cold behind her eyes. "You went through my classified materials?" I smiled. "So we're done pretending?" Another silence. Then, finally, she said, "You have no idea what you're playing with." I stood up. "No. You don't." I walked away, left her sitting there. She didn't follow. She knew. The game had shifted. And this time, she wasn't holding the board. The next morning, the calls started. First, from a number in DC. Then one from Maryland. Both unlisted. Both ignored. By noon, a white SUV was parked 2 houses down. Same car every day, different driver. The same blank stares behind the tinted windows. They weren't watching her. They were watching me. But I wasn't hiding anymore. I filed a motion with the local court under a special clause, protective petition for mental coercion. Attached were statements from the law firm, preliminary forensic evidence, and a sealed file labeled Government Oversight Classified. I'd made sure the judge on the case had a military background. Someone who knew how deep the rabbit hole went. The order came through 2 days later, a temporary separation of assets, restriction on shared account withdrawals, and, most importantly, a legal freeze on the house. She couldn't sell. Couldn't transfer. Couldn't touch a dime. She tried. She went to the bank. I know because the branch manager called me. A friend. Told me she was calm at first, then angry. Then confused. Then she just left, silent. I found her in the kitchen that night, holding a glass of wine she hadn't touched. "You planned this," she said quietly. "I adapted," I replied. "You're not the man I married." I nodded. "I never was. You just wrote the version you wanted." She stared at me, But her eyes weren't angry anymore. They were afraid. And for the first time, she realized I wasn't going to stop. The next week was chaos. The oversight committee I'd leaked to? They issued a statement denying any knowledge of Echelon. But the media picked it up. Independent journalists started digging. One even came to our street. I watched from the window as she closed the blinds and paced the living room. They started pulling records. The fake passport? Under review. Her employment history? Holes were appearing. That clearance certificate with the AK signature? Someone in the private intel community leaked a memo. AK was an alias used by operatives under federal review for rogue activity in the early 2000s. And her name? It came up, once. Buried in a footnote in a Senate transcript from a closed-door hearing, dated 1998. Subject classified under Domestic Integration Protocol. Evaluation ongoing. It was all unraveling. I didn't say a word. She tried, one last time, 3 nights later. I woke up to her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at me. I loved you, she said. I didn't respond. I did what I had to do. It wasn't always real, but some of it was. Still, I said nothing. She reached out, placed a hand on my chest. I don't want to lose you. I looked her dead in the eyes. You lost me a long time ago. She pulled her hand back slowly. Stood up. Walked out of the room. The next morning, she was gone. No note. No suitcase. Just gone. And for the first time in 50 years, I stood in that house, truly alone. And finally free. 3 days passed and I didn't hear from her. I watched the news. I tracked reports online. The leak had spread like wildfire, but most people didn't understand what they were looking at. Old government programs, they said. Conspiracy theories, others muttered. But in the backrooms, in the places where real power listened, people were paying attention. My lawyer called me on the 4th day. They're requesting a closed-door session. Who? I asked, though I already knew. 2 representatives from Homeland. 1 from a private security firm. They're not threatening, but they are persistent. Let them wait. Jack, this is bigger than her. I know, I said. And I'm not done yet. That same night, Vincent reached out. She didn't just vanish, he told me. She went dark. You sure? She accessed an old dead-drop server. One of the old offshore mirrors. Buried under 5 layers of proxy. Took me an hour to trace. And? She's in contact with someone. Codename, Rook. That name made my jaw clench. Rook was a ghost. A handler known for cleaning up burned operations. I'd heard the name during my contracting days. Nobody had seen him in person. But the trail he left was unmistakable: quiet disappearances, legal purges, vanishing data. If she reached out to him, she wasn't running. She was regrouping. And I wasn't about to let her reset the board. I spent the next 48 hours doing what she never expected. I turned the game outward. She had always relied on silence. Shadows. Private files. Hidden protocols. But now I flipped the script. I contacted every person she had ever interacted with under her false identity. I built a dossier: names, dates, connections, photos, timelines. I sent it anonymously, quietly, to their inboxes. To their wives. To their bosses. Some of them ignored it. Others didn't. By the end of the week, her name was on internal watch lists in 3 different organizations. One of them froze her access badge. Another flagged her passport for secondary screening. I didn't need to trap her physically. I was collapsing her ability to operate. She was becoming radioactive. Exactly what I wanted. But I didn't stop there. I went to see an old friend named Davis, former FBI, retired in a quiet cabin upstate. We'd played chess every fall for 10 years, then lost touch. When I arrived, he poured me coffee like I'd never left. "She played you," he said after I finished telling him everything. "She did. But you're not here for comfort." "No." "You want justice?" I shook my head. "Worse." He studied me over the rim of his mug. "You want her to watch it all burn?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll make a call." That's all it took. Within 72 hours, 3 independent investigative journalists were working on the story. One was former military, now a freelancer. Another ran a podcast that specialized in buried truth. The third had lost a brother in a classified operation that no one ever acknowledged. They didn't need much to get started. Once they had the foundation, they dug. And what they found? It was worse than I imagined. My wife, or the woman I thought was my wife, had been embedded in at least 4 separate domestic projects. She had lived in 3 states under different identities. She had recruited at least 2 other assets, both of whom had vanished after their usefulness expired. One was declared dead. The other was never reported missing. Her fingerprints weren't on everything, she was too smart for that, but her shadow was. The podcasts exploded. Married to a Ghost. Domestic Asset, the Echelon Files. Love, Lies, and Government Eyes. People listened. People shared. Suddenly, the polite, elegant woman next door, the one who'd smiled at barbecues and hugged the neighbor's kids, was being talked about in whispers. One woman at the grocery store dropped her apples when she recognized the face from a pixelated thumbnail on her phone. But the real damage wasn't to her reputation. It was to her world. Her handler, this rook, tried to clean up. Tried to erase digital trails. But I had anticipated that. I uploaded backups through time triggers. Every file he tried to scrub triggered another wave of leaks. The more they tried to contain it, the more it spread. The house phone rang one night. I let it go to voicemail. It was her. "You think you've won," she said. Her voice was flat. "But you don't understand how deep this goes. You never did." She paused, and for the first time, just a hint of something else in her tone. "You don't know what they'll do to you for this." She hung up. I replayed the message once, then deleted it. I stood at the window that night, the wind brushing the trees. The house was quiet. Too quiet. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the quiet. I welcomed it. She was still out there. Watching. Planning. But now she knew something she never expected to learn about me. I wasn't just a pawn anymore. I was the storm. The problem with people like her is that they always think they are protected. They believe in walls, layers of identity, layers of favors, layers of silence. They live their lives like chess matches, always 5 moves ahead, always counting on the fact that no one will dare call their bluff. But what happens when someone like me, someone they've underestimated for 50 years, decides to tear down the board? The week after her voicemail, I received a formal letter. Sealed, couriered, hand-delivered. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A cease and desist. No official signature, no agency stamp. Just a message: you are in possession of sensitive material. Cease dissemination immediately. Failure to comply will result in escalated response. I laughed out loud. They were trying to scare me. After everything I'd been through, they thought a thread on paper would make me stop? They forgot who I was. I used to write counter-infiltration protocols. I trained young analysts in how to dismantle active disinformation networks. I had spent years watching people like her build lies and learning how to unravel every thread. So I wrote back. Just one line. "You're already too late." I didn't sign it. Instead, I spent the next 48 hours setting up a chain reaction. All the files, recordings, and statements I had been sitting on, every bit of it, were scheduled for release across multiple platforms at different intervals. Timed backups, mirrored content, anonymous sources. Even if they shut one down, 3 more would open. It wasn't about going viral. It was about making sure that no one could unsee the truth. That same night, I drove out to the cabin where I'd first planned the drop. The same place where I started this war. I needed space to think. The silence helped me plan, helped me breathe. But I wasn't alone. A truck pulled into the gravel lot at 1:27 a.m. No headlights. I didn't move. Didn't make a sound. I watched through the blinds as 2 men stepped out, black jackets, plain jeans, clean-cut hair. Not locals. They looked around, conferred quietly, then walked toward the cabin. I stepped outside before they could knock. "You're on private property," I said calmly. One of them showed a badge, not police, not federal. It was one of those contractor badges that meant nothing and everything. "Mr. Marlowe," he said. "We're here on behalf of an interested party. I don't take visitors. This isn't a visit. It's a courtesy." I nodded. "Then consider it delivered. Now leave." The second man reached into his coat. Not for a weapon, for a phone. He held it up. "She wants to talk." I stared at it for a long time. Then I took it. Her voice came through, quiet, steady. "You've made a mess, Jack." "No," I said. "I made a choice. They'll bury you for this." "Maybe. But they'll bury you first." A pause. "Why are you doing this?" That one almost made me laugh. "Because you stole 50 years of my life and filled it with lies. Because you turned me into a project. Because you tried to erase me like a file on a server. And because now, you don't get to walk away clean." She didn't respond right away. Then, it wasn't all fake. Some of it was real. I closed my eyes. That's the part that hurts the most. I handed the phone back. "Tell her to run. Tell her to hide. It won't matter." They didn't argue. They just left. And with them, the last chance she had to negotiate. The next day, the third wave of information dropped. Internal memos, handler code names, partial video files from the storage unit she thought I hadn't copied. Faces blurred, voices distorted, but real. Authentic. Enough to set off another firestorm. She was no longer a ghost. She was a name. A liability. Within 24 hours, 3 former associates of hers were pulled in for questioning. One of them, a retired psychological ops advisor, had already started shredding documents. Too late. The journalists were faster. I received a call from a restricted number that evening. This time, I picked up. "You've done more damage in 1 month than most whistleblowers manage in a year," said the voice. "Who is this?" "Someone who's been watching her for a long time. Thank you for your work. We'll handle the rest." Then the line went dead. I stood there with the phone in my hand for a long time. Not because I was afraid. Because I finally understood what I'd done. I hadn't just exposed her. I'd collapsed the world she belonged to. She could run. She could change her face, her name, her history. But she'd never be clean again. Every door she once walked through now had a camera. Every favor she once called in now came with suspicion. And me? I was no longer just a husband. I was the man who made the system bleed. It was raining the night she came back. I hadn't seen her in nearly 2 weeks. The house had been quiet, unnervingly so. No calls. No letters. No more warnings. Just silence, the kind that creeps in and settles in your bones. But I knew she wasn't gone. Not really. People like her don't just disappear. They wait. They watch. They choose their moment. She chose mine. I was reading on the porch when I heard the sound of gravel under tires. Slow. Deliberate. A black sedan pulled into the driveway, headlights off. She stepped out wearing the same coat she'd worn for years, the soft gray one with the belt tied just a little too tight at the waist. She looked tired. Her hair was wet. No umbrella. She walked up the steps like she still lived here. I didn't move. "Can I come in?" she asked. I didn't answer. She opened the screen door and stepped inside the porch. The smell of rain followed her, mixed with something else, something cold and sterile, like hospital air. "I didn't come to argue," she said. "Or to threaten." I looked at her. "Then why are you here?" She sat in the chair across from me, the one she used to use when we watched the sunset together. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, "They've cut me off." I nodded slowly. "Good. My name is being erased from systems. My accounts are frozen. My contacts, most of them don't even answer anymore." "You're radioactive," I said. She gave a faint smile. "Your word spread further than I thought." That was the point. She looked at me, and for the first time, there was no mask. No charm. No performance. Just a woman who had built her life on a foundation of shadows, and now stood with nothing beneath her feet. "I loved you," she said. "No," I replied. "You used me." Her voice cracked, just slightly. "Maybe at first. Maybe that's how it started. But it changed, Jack. Over the years, it became something real. You don't get to rewrite the story now. You had 50 years to choose truth. I didn't have that option." "Bullshit." She flinched. I never used that tone with her before. Not in 50 years. And now it hit her like a slap. "I kept you alive," she whispered. "You kept me controlled. I protected you. You monitored me." She closed her eyes, breathing hard. "You don't understand what they were planning. I don't care anymore." She looked at me with something between pleading and exhaustion. "They're going to come for me, Jack. You know that. They won't let this go." "Good." She stood, pacing the porch slowly. The rain pounded behind her, lightning flickering in the distance. "I can't hide forever." "You won't have to." She turned sharply. "What do you mean?" I stood up, walked past her into the house, and came back with a single manila envelope. I handed it to her. She opened it slowly. Inside, a letter, notarized, dated, signed by me. A legal confession. Not of guilt. Of ownership. "I submitted that 3 days ago," I said. "To the Department of Justice. It places full responsibility for the leak on me. Says you were a peripheral figure, unaware of the scale. You were manipulated by a rogue faction." I gave them just enough truth to make it believable. She looked at me in shock. "Why would you do that?" I leaned in close, looked her straight in the eyes. "Because now you owe me." Her lips parted, but no words came. "You don't go into hiding," I said. "You go to court." You testify. You burn every contact you ever had. Every name. Every op. You put it all on record. And if you don't, that envelope? The real one? With the real data? It goes public. She stared at me in horror. You would destroy me. No, I said. I already did. This is just the final act. She looked down at the paper again, her hands trembling. And if I refuse? I shrugged. Then you run. And you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. One day, someone finds you. Someone from the same system you used to serve. And they won't offer you a deal. She sat back down. The wind howled through the porch screens. You were always smarter than I gave you credit for, she said. I know. Silence fell again. Not awkward. Not tense. Just final. After a while, she stood. I'll think about it. You do that. She turned and stepped off the porch into the storm. No goodbye. No look back. I watched her disappear into the night, swallowed by rain and shadows. And I felt nothing. Not hate. Not anger. Not even relief. Just stillness. The kind that comes after everything has already burned. It's been 6 weeks since I last saw her. The storm that night marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. The rain washed her off my porch, off my conscience, off my past. She left with an envelope in her hand and a choice to make. I didn't follow. I didn't wait. I moved forward. The house is quieter now. Not in a mournful way, more like a space that finally remembers how to breathe. No more subtle watching from behind a book. No more whispered phone calls in the garden. No more fake smiles at dinner. Just silence. Honest, peaceful silence. I spend my mornings on the porch. Coffee. A notebook. Sometimes a crossword. Other times, I just sit. I don't think about her. Not anymore. When someone spends 50 years building a lie, there's nothing left to miss. Just a ghost wearing your memories like clothing. The legal storm passed quickly. The documents I'd submitted took most of the heat off me. The authorities asked questions, but not the kind that lead to courtrooms. They were more interested in her network, the names she could provide, the access she once had. I played dumb when I needed to. Cooperative, but vague. My lawyer called last week. She's testifying. I said nothing. She gave them 4 names. One of them was her handler. The real one. Still, I said nothing. She honored the deal. I nodded. That was her move. Predictable, in the end. She always chose survival. Even if it meant destroying the very system she once protected. That's what people like her do, they adapt, even when all they've ever been is a weapon. She didn't contact me again. No calls. No letters. No sign of where she went afterward. I doubt I'll ever see her again. And I don't need to. Because the truth isn't something she can take back. She can disappear into another name, another place, another story. But the foundation she stood on is cracked. The people who once called her an asset now call her a liability. Her world is gone. I didn't need to put her in a cell. I just needed to make sure that everywhere she ran, the walls closed in. The day I closed the last bank account with her name on it, I sat in the car for 10 minutes, staring at the closing statement. 50 years. One signature. And she was erased. That night, I burned what remained. Photos. Cards. Anniversary letters I once believed were real. I watched them curl and blacken in the fire pit out back. The heat didn't sting. It soothed. Like cauterizing a wound. I kept one thing, though. A photograph. From the early years. She's standing beside me on the shore of Lake Superior. We look like any old couple in love. Smiling. Wind in our hair. Arms around each other. But if you look closer, really look, her eyes aren't smiling. Not fully. There's distance in them. The same distance I ignored for decades. I pinned it to the back of my workshop door. A reminder. Never again. People ask if I regret anything. Yes. I regret trusting her the way I did. I regret not asking more questions. But I don't regret finding out. Because the truth, no matter how ugly, is better than living inside a dream someone else wrote for you. I'm not the same man I was a year ago. I don't believe in easy answers or soft endings. I don't believe in soulmates or fate or lifelong partnerships. I believe in observation. In patterns. In data. And I believe that some people were never meant to be known. Only exposed. Now, when I wake up, I don't feel her absence. I feel my presence. My clarity. My freedom. Sometimes, I think about the quietest moment in the storm, when she looked at me like she still had something to offer. And I remember how easy it was to say nothing. To just let her go. To let the silence speak for both of us. Because she didn't deserve closure. She didn't deserve forgiveness. She deserved exactly what she got. Nothing.